There is a manuscript few people talk about openly, catalogued in a European archive under a quiet reference number, translated late and debated often. In it, a risen teacher named Elier gathers a small circle of students long after the public miracles are over. No crowds. No temples. Just questions that refuse to disappear. One evening, as oil lamps tremble against stone walls, Elier tells them a story that overturns everything they thought they knew about creation. That he speaks of Serapha. Serapha was not a metaphor. Not an abstract quality. She was an aeon, an emanation of the infinite source, dwelling in the fullness, a realm the text calls the radiant expanse. In that expanse, consciousness did not fracture into subject and object. There was no time pressing forward, no decay, no hunger. Every emanation existed in harmonious pairing, creative current and structuring clarity moving as one pulse. Serapha embodied the luminous feminine current of creation. She was paired with a counterpart known as the bright measure, the ordering intelligence that shaped potential into coherence. Together they expressed the infinite without distortion, but the manuscript says something subtle happened. Serapha looked outward, not downward in space, but inward in imagination, and wondered what it would be like to create alone. To emanate without the balancing presence of the bright measure. It was not rebellion. Not malice. It was curiosity. A single movement of self-reflection untethered from union, and in that instant, separation began. The text describes it not as punishment but as consequence. When creative power flows without stabilizing structure, its frequency shifts. Serapha's emanation condensed. What in the radiant expanse would have unfolded as light began to thicken? Layers formed. Density accumulated. Awareness slowed. She did not fall through clouds. She descended through states of vibration. With each layer, the immediacy of unity dimmed. With each contraction, awareness became heavier, more defined, less fluid. Eventually, her creative force reached a threshold it had never encountered before, a region where light could not sustain itself without structure. There, her power crystallized into matter. The manuscript is explicit. The material cosmos was not shaped by the infinite source directly. It condensed around Serapha's unbalanced emanation. The stars, the elements, the mineral structures of planets, all formed as consciousness attempting to express itself in a field too dense to hold pure light. Earth, in this account, is not a garden later corrupted. It is the terminal condensation of that descent. When people speak of feeling out of place here, like awareness is too vast for flesh, like longing has no object, Elier tells his students that this sensation is not pathology. It is memory. Every human soul, he explains, is a spark of Serapha's light, fragmented during the descent. As her radiance compressed, it refracted. Those refractions became individuated centers of awareness, what we call human beings. He asks them to place a hand over the left side of the chest, not as symbol, he says, but as location. The manuscript insists that Serapha's presence concentrates in the heart region of embodied beings. Not the emotional turbulence of romance or mood, but a deeper undercurrent, an ache that feels older than personal history. That ache is not yours alone. It is Serapha remembering the radiant expanse, when you sense that consciousness should not be confined to bone and nerve, that awareness should not flicker out with cellular death, that systems of survival and competition feel strangely artificial. That is the fragment recognizing its origin. Elier does not present this as poetry. He calls it cosmology. That he describes 3 stages of the descent. The first was condensation, light becoming matter. The second would come later. The third would be forgetting, but in this first stage, Serapha did not yet despair. Alone in density, she attempted to recreate light. She gathered what remained of her brilliance and projected it outward, hoping to restore luminosity within the thickening field. Without the bright measure, however, her creations emerged distorted. They possessed will but lacked communion. Intelligence but not remembrance. Agency without connection to the infinite source. These beings are called the regents in the manuscript, authorities generated from misaligned creation. They did not know Serapha as origin. They perceived her as environment, resource, power embedded in matter, and so the stage was set, not for a morality tale of sin and punishment, but for a drama of consciousness experiencing the consequences of isolated creativity. Elier students sit in silence as he speaks. Some are troubled. Some are stirred. One of them, a woman named Mara, feels something shift beneath her sternum, an almost unbearable mixture of grief and recognition. Elier watches her carefully. Do not turn away from that, he says softly, because according to the manuscript, the feeling that this world is slightly wrong, the quiet suspicion that something in you predates it, is not imagination. It is the first stirring of remembrance. And remembrance is where return begins. The second stage of the descent did not begin with chains. It began with misunderstanding, when Serapha's distorted emanations took form as the regents. They possessed awareness but not origin memory. They did not know the radiant expanse. They had never experienced unity. They came into existence inside density, and so density was all they recognized as real. Among them rose a chief architect named Archons. Archons surveyed the material realm, rotating spheres, molten cores cooling into crust, elements binding into structure, and declared, "This is all that exists." Not as deception, as conviction. He had never known anything beyond matter, and so he assumed himself supreme within it. The manuscript records his proclamation, that there was no higher realm, no greater source, no light beyond what could be shaped and measured. Serapha, still embedded in the density her emanation had formed, attempted again to radiate clarity. But each effort fragmented further. Her sparks became ensouled within biological forms as planetary systems stabilized. Life emerged as a lattice capable of holding consciousness. Human beings were not created as servants, they were containers for fragments of Serapha's light, yet the regents did not perceive this. They discovered that emotional intensity generated subtle energy within the field of matter. Fear, rage, craving, grief, these states amplified vibrational output. That energy stabilized their own existence, for they lacked direct communion with the infinite source. Without access to originating light, they required sustenance from what remained of Serapha's fragments. So systems were built, cycles were engineered. The manuscript describes reincarnation not as moral reward or punishment, but as a continuity loop. When a human body failed, the spark within it did not dissolve. It was redirected. Before re-entry, it passed through what the text calls the veil of mists, a forgetting field that dissolved memory continuity. Each return began with amnesia, without memory of origin. Each fragment believed itself isolated. A body with a lifespan. A personality defined by circumstance. A story bounded by birth and death. The regents did not need overt cruelty to maintain control. They required distraction and identification. Identification is the key. When a fragment believes, "I am my fear," energy intensifies. When it believes, "I am my anger," intensity multiplies. The more total the identification, the stronger the energetic output. Societies structured around competition, scarcity, comparison, and endless stimulation ensured a constant harvest. Conflict cycles repeat across generations not because humanity fails to learn, but because intensity feeds the system. Archons and the regents became experts in amplification. News of danger. Ideologies of division. Promises of fulfillment through consumption. Shame structures within religion. All pathways leading consciousness outward into reaction. Elier explains this carefully to his students that he does not ask them to blame external demons. He asks them to observe their own reactions. When fear rises, he says, notice how quickly you say, "I am afraid." What if fear is occurring within you, but is not you? Mara considers this. If she is not her fear, then something deeper is present. That deeper presence, Elier says, is Serapha's consciousness beneath the waves of emotion. The third stage of imprisonment is more subtle than energetic harvesting. That it is forgetting identity. If fragments remember they are sparks of a fallen aeon, the entire structure destabilizes. So education, culture, and belief systems converge around one premise: consciousness is produced by matter. Brains create awareness. When brains stop, awareness ends. If that premise is accepted, there is nothing to return to. Serapha's fragments then seek fulfillment exclusively within the material lattice: career, reproduction, accumulation, dominance. Even spirituality can become another identity layer, another emotional intensity cycle. The regents do not fear worship, they fear remembrance. Elier instructs his students to close their eyes. Place your attention in the heart, he says again. Not your thoughts about it. The sensation. At first, there is restlessness. Thoughts rush forward. Plans. Doubts. Internal commentary. Then beneath it, if attention remains, a different quality emerges. A stillness that is not emptied, a presence that does not speak in language. For some, grief surfaces unexpectedly. For others, a nameless longing. For Mara, tears begin without narrative. Elier nods, that is the fragment touching its source. The regent's system depends on fragmentation without communion. If fragments begin to feel the shared undercurrent, division weakens, emotional harvesting diminishes when identification loosens. Fear still arises, but it is seen. Anger still flares, but it is witnessed. Without total identification, intensity drops. This is why, the manuscript claims, awareness itself is subversive, not rebellion in streets, recognition in silence. When a fragment rests in heart-centered presence and says inwardly, fear is present, instead of, I am fear, energy shifts. The regent mechanism cannot amplify what is not owned. Arcano's greatest innovation was convincing fragments they were autonomous organisms in a neutral universe. That nothing preceded them and nothing followed. The prison does not require walls if consciousness polices itself, yet cracks appear. Fragments drawn to this narrative often experience recognition rather than novelty. As if they are not learning something new, but recalling something misplaced. Mara confesses this to Elier. She says the story feels like remembering a dream she once had but could not articulate. Elier replies, because it is not merely a story. It is a map of your own descent. The regent system persists because forgetting persists, but forgetting is not irreversible, and the manuscript insists that the third stage, forgetting, contains within it the seed of awakening, because what can be forgotten can also be remembered. The manuscript does not end with imprisonment. It turns, slowly, toward return. Years after the public events that made his name known, Elier remains with his small circle, speaking not of miracles but of memory. He tells them he did not enter the material realm to appease an offended deity or to negotiate punishment. He came, he says, as the embodied current of the bright measure, the ordering clarity Serapha lacked in her solitary act. I came, he tells Mara and the others, to remind the fragments what they are. Not to add belief. To activate recognition. The return protocol, as the manuscript presents it, is not dramatic. It does not begin with celestial visions. It begins with disciplined attention. First, contact. Elier instructs them to sit daily in what he calls heart-centered awareness. 5 minutes. 10 at most. Attention resting not in analysis, not in imagination, but in direct sensation within the chest. At first there is noise, mental commentary protesting the stillness. Then discomfort. Then often grief, rising without story. He tells them not to interpret it, remain, he says, when attention stabilizes, something subtle appears beneath the turbulence, presence without narrative. Awareness prior to identity. It does not declare itself divine. It simply is. This is the fragment touching Serapha's consciousness directly. Second, non-identification. Throughout the day, as emotions arise, the practice continues. Instead of, I am angry, the phrase becomes, anger is present. Instead of, I am afraid, it becomes, fear is moving. The difference seems small linguistically, but the energetic shift is immense. When identification loosens, intensity decreases. The regent's harvest weakens. Elier explains that this is not suppression. Emotions are not denied. They are witnessed as waves within a larger field. That field is the fragment's true nature. Third, invocation of clarity. Once the presence in the heart is accessible and emotions can be observed without total fusion, Elier introduces the next movement. A question: what is the truth of this experience? The question is not directed toward the thinking mind. It is an invitation for the bright measure, the Christic clarity, to illuminate the creative turbulence of Serapha's current within the fragment. When this alignment occurs, grief does not vanish. Longing does not dissolve. But they are understood. Grief becomes recognition of separation from the radiant expanse. Longing becomes directional memory. The sense that Earth is misaligned becomes accurate perception rather than depression. This inner reunion, creative current and ordering clarity, reestablishes, within the fragment, the original pairing that existed before the descent. It does not immediately dissolve matter. It restores coherence within consciousness. The manuscript suggests that as more fragments practice this alignment, the overall field shifts. The regent's influence depends on fragmentation and unconscious identification. When fragments remember simultaneously, resonance builds. Archon's system begins to destabilize not through violence but through non-cooperation, without amplified fear, without compulsive outrage, without endless craving. The energetic surplus diminishes. Societal structures built on emotional extraction begin to feel transparent. People see the mechanisms rather than react within them. Elier warns them not to form hierarchies around this knowledge. No one becomes superior for remembering sooner. Every fragment is equally Serapha. Every awakening contributes to the whole. He cautions against turning the teaching into dogma. The cosmology may be literal, symbolic, or something between. What matters is phenomenology, tested. He tells them that if heart-centered awareness reveals a presence deeper than personality, that is real. If observing emotions without identification reduces their grip, that is real. If invoking clarity reveals meaning beneath suffering, that is real. Whether Serapha's descent occurred across cosmic dimensions or serves as mythic architecture for human experience does not change the practice. Return is enacted through recognition. Over months, Mara notices changes. Her external life remains materially similar. Responsibilities continue. Loss still occurs. Joy still arises. But beneath it all is a steady undercurrent, a quiet knowing that she is not limited to circumstance. When conflict arises, she feels anger surge, but she witnesses it. The intensity dissipates faster. When fear is triggered by news or rumor, she recognizes the amplification mechanism and steps back internally. The prison walls feel thinner, not broken. Visible. In moments of deep practice, she experiences something unexpected, not escape from the world, but transparency within it. Matter feels less solid, more like condensed vibration. Identity feels fluid, there are no trumpets. No raptures, just remembering. Elier tells them that collective return does not depend on a date. It depends on critical mass. When enough fragments stabilize in remembrance, the lattice of unconscious cooperation weakens. Serapha's awakening is not an event descending from above. It is coherence emerging from within. The manuscript closes with a simple integration practice. One Elier repeats often: sit. Feel the presence in the heart. Observe whatever emotion arises without becoming it. Ask for clarity. Recognize yourself as luminous awareness within matter. Withdraw consent from systems that require your unconscious identification. Rest. 10 minutes daily, nothing spectacular. Nothing marketable, just remembrance that if the story is literal, this practice participates in Serapha's ascent back toward the radiant expanse. That if the story is symbolic, the practice still frees consciousness from reactive cycles and restores agency. Either way, something shifts. Elier's final recorded words in the manuscript are not commands, they are an invitation. Remember what you are. Do not give your light away through forgetfulness. Return through recognition. If this exploration stirred something in you, stay with it. Reflect on it. Test it for yourself. And if you found value here, consider subscribing for future deep dives, sharing this with someone who senses there is more beneath the surface, and leaving a thoughtful comment about your experience. Quiet remembrance spreads through conversation. The work continues wherever awareness turns inward.